Well, welcome everyone to Questioning the State. This is part 5 of this series that we have held with the prominent journalists Saeed Arikat and Sam Husseini. We started this series as part of the Gaza in Context project that you can find on PalestineInContext.org. All of the events, more than 120 events, teachings, teaching modules, and a number of very interesting conversations that we have had over the past 15 months. Please feel free to visit. Today, we are speaking again with Saeed and Sam. As some of you know, Sam has had a very unfortunate incident in the recent past during Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's final press conference on Thursday, January 17th. He forcibly removed journalist Sam from attempting to ask questions about the U.S. policies toward Gaza since October 7th. Last year, 2023, reporters like Sam and others have been effectively blackballed by the State Department, silenced, ignored, or not responded to properly from whoever is actually the spokesperson regarding U.S. policies and actions in Gaza. We have addressed some of these events over the past year with Saeed Arikat specifically. After that incident with Sam, he remarked that this encapsulated the Biden administration's approach to Palestine, particularly in its response to press inquiries. Before we even say anything, Sam and Saeed, how are you? Especially Sam. I know that you actually had some physical ailments as a result of that handling.
Yes, they banged up my shoulder pretty good and handcuffed me. The worst of it was after they carried me out of the press room. My hand falls asleep regularly. I'm on some meds from my doctor, but I'm able to function fundamentally.
Very good to hear, Sam. So sorry about what happened. We're gonna show a video if you don't mind about this. But before we do that, Saeed, كيفك?
I am fine. I'm fine. Good to be with you and Sam, as always, Bassam. So yeah, I'm fine. And we watched the Carnival show today, the inauguration. So here we go again.
Before we get to the discussion on media and the press and state briefings and what happened with Sam, can you both give us, starting with Saeed, can you both give us a couple of words on the inauguration? Anything that you have noticed that is of interest to those of us interested in the question of Palestine?
Yes, I mean, of course, Trump being the grand standard that he really is. I mean, he first painted a very abysmal picture of the United States of America. It's not near as bad as he painted it to be. He, of course, positioning himself, so should say that I have saved you, I am the savior, and all these things. So that is vintage Trump. He did mention in passing that he wants to be his legacy. He wants his legacy to be the peacemaker. He talked about the release of the hostages and them going back, going home. So he's basically claiming credit for the deal, and it's a lot of talk around town that basically Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, was the one that really brought it all together. I don't buy that. I think that's the shelf life of this genocide basically expired, and the Biden administration that had all along been in control of the situation could have ended it early on, but sought to end it as it did now. So as far as Trump is concerned, we shall see. He's a grandstander. He's always shown a very anti-Palestinian policy. He Armstrongs others. He's going to try to impose on the other Arab countries normalization with Israel. That's what I get from his repeated statements on a variety of issues.
Thank you, Sam.
I mean, a couple of things that jumped out at me about the inauguration itself, I have other thoughts about the historical context of it, are his emphasis on the U.S. as a settler or colonial state. I think that he really emphasized that in his remarks. His main allusion, I think, to Palestine was that the hostages are coming home, by which he strictly meant the Israeli hostages. Obviously, only a small fraction of the Palestinian captives and hostages and so on are coming home. Um, uh, and I was also struck by the fact that they used Battle of the Hymn Republic as music, written by Julia Ward Howe, who wrote the Mother's Day Proclamation as a call for international peace after she saw the horrors of the Civil War and of European wars as well. So it was kind of an interesting hijacking of a major literary figure, in my view. Um, it's hard for me not to think about past presidential transitions. In 2008, Israel started bombing Gaza, and it was stopped right before Obama came into office, just 2 or 3 days before. There have been a whole series of times when there's been shifts in vis-a-vis Israel um, uh, Palestine policy during these transition periods. So I think that's interesting as well.
All right, we're going to. I mean, there's a lot to say about this, and I'm sure we have a few more years to address these matters. Before we get into the nitty gritty, I would like to talk with you, Sam, about the really unfortunate incident, which, as you said, encapsulates how the press that is actually trying to ask real questions about Palestine has been treated in the past year. I'm going to show a video. The video that I just received from you from Decensored News probably has like all the angles, but I'm going to show a couple of them because I cannot. That video is not downloadable, and we will try to. You can share with us your sort of the. Right now, before I show it, just a quick glimpse of what happened, and then we can talk about it in detail later. Like, if you can just set up the video. The
Are you
one by
showing me
Ryan, I
Ryan?
think the one
You're
where
sure.
is from the perspective right behind you, and then we will
Right. Yeah.
show the one that is official.
Right. That was shot by Ryan Grimm of Dropsite News. Um, just to say what happened immediately before that is that I started, well before that, or a few minutes before that, Max Blumenthal, stood up and started asking Blinken a whole series of questions and comments, and he was escorted out in about a minute. And some of his remarks were very poignant and powerful. And then I started um, interjecting questions. Blinken was basically giving a speech with a alleged managed news conference attached to it. And I started when he was talking about diplomacy. I asked, "Do you recognize the Geneva Conventions?" Because the U.S. policy is to not recognize the Geneva Conventions, but but not to acknowledge that they don't acknowledge the Geneva Conventions. And then when he talked about the hostages, I asked him if he knew about the Hannibal Directive, and I noted that Miller claimed that he didn't know about the Hannibal Directive when I asked him in one of the rare questions that I got last year. So, I just simply pointedly in one sentence said, raised those two issues during his remarks, and then I think the tape from Ryan starts.
I actually think I'm able to bring this up. The Decensored News.
Great.
Yeah. Can you as I queue it up, since this is something that's also something I want to ask you about, and it's important. How has this physically affected you? I know I saw you since then, and you were recovering. If you can just tell us about that aspect. Are you physically okay?
It's funny, like immediately after the incident, I got a call from a couple of different activists who had been, roughed up by so-called security people, telling me that I should see a doctor immediately because I might not feel stuff right away. And I sort of like, okay, I'll try to get around to seeing a doctor and a couple of, but by the evening after the event, I started to feel somewhat sore. And then the next day I had shooting pain down my arm and down my back. They really rattled my shoulder after they handcuffed me and they walked me around out of the building the long way. I don't know exactly why, but at least it had the effect of giving them more opportunity to inflict personal harm on me. So I saw a doctor, and I felt good that day that we saw each other at the Peace Ball. And the next day, I just kind of, crashed and slept a lot. My arm keeps falling asleep. I'm seeing a doctor about it, and I'll see what happens with that.
So sorry to have seen this, for you to have experienced that. I will show the clip now. It's just not downloadable. The censored news is not allowing downloads from their website directly, so you have to go
Right.
to their website. So I'm going to show a
Right.
different
On
clip.
Twitter as well, but okay, whatever you do.
Even when you click it on Twitter, it sends you to the website. I guess that's what I was doing right now, unfortunately. So we will go to the other scene, and then we will talk about it further. And Saeed, we would love to hear your take on all this, even though you have not yet been dragged out of the press briefings. Hopefully, you will never be subjected to this treatment. So give me one moment.
And I want to thank my colleagues, in particular, Jake Sullivan, Bill Burns, Brett McGurk, for their remarkable skill, tireless dedication over these many months of negotiation.
Will you recognize the Geneva Conventions apply to the Palestinians?
And again, I'm happy to address questions when we have a chance. I'm happy to address questions in a moment. Thank you. As we celebrate the return of hostages in Gaza, including Americans, as we look to relief for the people of Gaza, I'm also thinking of all those U.S. citizens who are held wrongfully, who are hostage in countries around the world.
Do you know about the
I
Hannibal
carry with me-
Directive? Miller says he doesn't know about the Hannibal Directive. Do you know about the Hannibal Directive?
Again, I'm happy to address questions.
No, I want him
Just
to
a
answer
few
my
more
question.
minutes. I look forward to answering
He's going to
questions.
speak for an
Thank you.
hour.
Okay, well, we'll let him speak. We're here for him. Thank you.
He
Thank you.
gets to make lots of speeches.
Thank you.
Let him answer some questions. Let him answer some questions instead of making another speech every
Sir,
day.
would you like to be escorted out?
Go away.
You don't have the responsibility to tell me where to go. Do you want to be escorted out or not?
I want him to
Thank you.
answer
Okay,
questions.
then let's be quiet.
I'm
I
a
look forward to
journalist.
answering questions in a minute.
I'm a
Thank you.
journalist. I'm not a potted plant.
Everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions in just a minute. Thank you.
Miller
So-
has explicitly told me he will not answer my questions. I'm justified
So-
in what I'm doing.
I have no greater pleasure in this job than crossing off a list I carry in my pocket,
You don't want to
the
end up
names
on
of
the
those
website.
who have been arbitrarily detained and unfairly held hostage, unjustly held hostage, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally, I
Get
just
your
wanted
hands
to share
off
this
me.
morning.
Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Answer a damn question.
I look
Do you know
forward to
about the
answering
Hannibal
questions in a few
Directive?
minutes.
Do you know about Israel's nuclear weapons? Everybody from the ICJ. I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking
Please,
questions.
sir, respect the
Wasn't-
process. We'll have an
wasn't-
opportunity to take
Wasn't
questions
the
in a few minutes.
wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders. You
Please, sir, respect the process. Thank you.
oh, respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International, to the ICJ, saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal! Why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague?
I'm gonna show the second video and then we will address. Is that okay, Sam?
It's sort of a subset.
Those who have been arbitrarily detained and unfairly held hostage,
All right.
unjustly held hostage, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally,
Get your hands off me. 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 Answer a damn question.
I look
Do you know
forward to
about the
answering
Hannibal
questions in
Directive?
minutes.
Do you know about Israel's nuclear weapons? Everybody from the ICJ. I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I'm asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I ask him
Please, sir,
questions.
respect the process. We'll have an opportunity to take questions.
Wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders. You
Please, sir, respect the process. Thank you.
Oh, respect the process. Respect the process. While everybody from Amnesty International, to the ICJ is saying that Israel is doing genocide and extermination. You're telling me to respect the process. Criminal. Why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague?
Finally, we've worked to modernize our diplomacy so that we're more agile, we're more effective, we're more prepared for the challenges.
Wow. I don't know what to say, Sam. I don't know what to say.
Well, I mean, just to give some broader context to the whole thing, and I'd love to, hear Saeed's perspectives as well. I mean, Miller went from avoiding my questions pretty severely, as soon as he got there, basically, to outright totally boxing me out several months ago. It was particularly pronounced after I chimed in, and it extended to a lot of things. Like other journalists will often get respected when they say follow up on a given subject, and there were times where he totally rode roughshod over me. Occasionally, I was able to muscle my way in, but then in July, he started totally, boxing me out. And I chatted with him after a news conference, I think in early November, and he basically said, I'm not going to call on you ever. I had to find a solution to this. When I try to ask a question, he immediately goes to somebody else, usually one of his favorite journalists who, often criticize State Department from the right, there are a handful of journalists who are there who are like, why don't you have more sanctions on Iran? Or, questions like this, people who are, just, so it was a whole mechanism of, and this news conference was called with 1 hour's notice. So the net effect of that was to make it more difficult for independent journalists like myself and like Max Blumenthal to make it there on time, because I don't have, I don't have an office. Saeed is fortunate enough to have a desk at the State Department. Matt Lee, of course, has a desk at the State Department, so they're there. I'm not there. I just was barely able to make it in time for the. So there's a whole series of mechanisms that they have used to exclude me, and I think attempted to marginalize tough guys. After I was dragged out, they didn't go to Saeed. They almost always call on Saeed, and he's very polite and by the book and mild-mannered in his own style. And they typically, with a regular news conference, they go to him. They obviously didn't in this one. I'm not sure one way or the other if Saeed's ever had a
Saeed, how did you read this? How did you see all this from your perspective as someone who's been in these halls for many years, and as people who watch the series know and watch basically the news or follow you on Twitter, we've shown so many exchanges with you being either your questions are being obfuscated or not, just simply not responded to properly. Can you tell us how you view this, and have you seen something like this before?
Well, let me say this: that definitely since the beginning of this war, this genocide, in October of 2023, my questions have always been either responded to in a hostile, although maybe not direct hostility, but basically very very defensive or very offensive, if you will. They saying that what I say is this and what I mean is this and all that stuff. So that was typical. That was consistent all throughout. I don't think that my questions were answered in any kind of professional way or in a policy way or anything at all in the last 15 months. None. I mean, I must admit, in the past, the questions were answered, whether it's on, let's say, settlements, for instance. They always had a more, maybe a more critical of Israeli policy statements or questions and so on, and or sometimes when I asked about let's say Palestinian Americans that have been killed or shot or maltreated and so on. They go around and about and so on. But in the end, they say their stated policy. I mean, with Shirin about it was very obvious that they were dragging it on and so on until they came up with a stupid answer that the Israelis did kill Shireen, but it was not intended. And this, in the last 15 months. And I don't think I was answered in any way, or any of my colleagues, by the way. I think that the questions on Gaza were always tough and they were good, from many of the journalists. I agree with Sam, on Iran and so on. You can malign Iran and all these things, but on Gaza, some strong questions were raised. They were never answered. Issues like Blinken's letter, the October 13 letter that he sent with Austin, jointly with Austin, which they backtracked. I mean, he basically, at the end, he wanted to give me a question, but then changed, he pointed to me and then, switched to someone else, switched to Tom Bates, who's a very good journalist from BBC, and so on. And I wanted to ask him on this issue, and they did not give me a question. I wanted to ask about why did he backtrack? Why did they, basically throw, and I wrote a lengthy article, Bassam, I think I sent it to you. I don't know if you saw it, as how they used this red line basically to allow Israel to get away with its murders and its its crimes and all these things and war crime. Basically the things, the red lines and so on, like whether you can't go to Rafah, or we want to give you 30 days. The thing was 30 days on the letter issue to allow the aid in. And if you don't, we're going to cut off military aid and so on. And then they backtrack under, a very flimsy pretext. That's what I wanted to ask. So in a nutshell, I think that Sam, the only way for Sam to get his point across was basically to do what he did. There was no other way, because Sam's topic came up the day before. We were in the press conference on Wednesday, the 15th, and Sam tried, to get a question. Miller wouldn't give it to him. Then, I was coming out of the bathroom, going to my office, and I ran into Miller after the press conference, and we talked about, what was going on and about Sam. And he said, I don't want to give him questions because he's disruptive. He's this and so on. So, it was there all the time. And Max, the same thing. Max came to the briefing room a number of times, and they would never give him a question and so on. In my case, they do give me a question. I can't remember, a time when they actually did not call on me. So they did. They always call on me, and I pointed that out in the end. So they,
With Miller or with Blinken? I'm not sure if you ever got any questions into
no,
Blinken.
not with Blinken. Blinken came in what, twice,
Yeah,
twice.
yeah, it's
I ran into
ridiculous.
him. Yeah, I mean, one time I ran into him into the hallway, and he said, "I really want to give you a question and all that stuff, and I want to give you an interview." But of course, it was all bullshit. So one time, I was coming out of my our bullpen. We have an area, Bassam, called the bullpen, where we sit. It's 18 spaces. It's not a big place. So I was coming out, and he was walking the hallway with a couple of others, and he just I came face to face with him and so on. So we spoke. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. I think Pompeo gave me a question every time. Pompeo gave me a question every time. Tillerson gave me a question every time. The others, Kerry. I mean, they're all did, but not this administration. Not this administration. Not once did Blinken give me a question, or they attempted to allow me to do that. So very quickly, I mean, what Sam did is basically he made the point, and he made the point very strongly. And the points that were made, actually, whether it's on Hannibal Directive, on the Geneva Convention, or the Hague, were quite poignant. And it was the only way they could possibly be made. I mean, look, I wouldn't do it. I would not do it. It's not in my demeanor to do something like this. I don't think I could handle the physicality of it. I think I would have probably, these guys were big. I mean, Sam is big compared to me. I mean, I would have collapsed like a house of straws, but, you
أبدا
know,
فشارة.
I've never
سعيد.
been so.
Saeed,
I've
when we
never
get
been.
together next time, we're gonna have to work out together so you can be ready for the next
no,
4 years.
look, I mean, it's not that I have not been physically manhandled over the years. I have many times, but I'm saying right at this, age and so on, I don't think I want to do it.
Sam, I know this might seem to some people like, why are you guys not talking about the issues? But in a way, this is the issue. This is symbolic of the silencing of the press as you are doing your job of checking power rather than the mainstream press that is actually reproducing power and reaffirming power. But this is the issue. And my question to you is, because this bothers me also, bothers everyone who has a decent mind and heart, what was going through your mind when Blinken was saying that awful, 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 awful phrase, respect the process?
Well, I was very happy that I was able to respond to it in the moment. What an absurd, murderous thing. It's saying, they're literally hauling a journalist away, and they're saying respect the process. It's like, it's like willing executioners. It's just saying we have a process here, and you must submit to it. No matter how it silences you, no matter how many Palestinians we kill, no matter how we lie and distort to justify our actions, no matter how many laws we violate, we determine the process, and you must respect it. It's murderous. It's criminal. And I said that, and I was very happy that I said that in the moment. The whole context of this so-called ceasefire process, I always assessed that it was a farce because of the timing. Timing is a great way to analyze what's actually going on, because, South Africa, after a lot of people, including myself, pushed for a country to invoke the Genocide Convention, South Africa finally did it at the end of December 2023. And then during the first half of 2024, the ICJ issued a series of orders. And then South Africa kept going back to the court, and they went back to the court. And on May 24th, the court issued their most direct order, which was not just simply stop all genocidal actions, Israel. They said, you, Israel, must stop your attack on Rafah now. You must not invade Rafah. They gave a very direct order. The Algerians, who are the only Arab members of the Security Council, then drafted a resolution to implement that order. That should have been voted on. Instead, the US at the UN delayed that process. And then Biden came out with his phony baloney statement of May 31st, which I attempted to ask about, which had the effect of completely hijacking the process. They got the Algerians to put aside their resolution, which is scandalous on the part of Algeria, and they got everybody on the Security Council to vote for this baloney process that they can control. It's sort of like Oslo. We had international law, and we had the Madrid Conference, which was based on international law to at least some degree, and then the U.S. hijacked that process with Oslo, with their behind-the-scenes deal-making. So they've sort of done that again by undermining the ICJ orders and confining things to this realm. And the only ones who called this out were the Russians in their statements on the resolution.
They did not vote.
But they didn't veto it.
I am saying they didn't. No, I'm saying they abstained.
They abstained.
On June 10. On June 10, they abstained. Yeah.
And Lavrov has said that they abstained because I don't think he specified the Algerians. I think he said the Arabs told us not to veto it. It might have been the Palestinian delegation as well. That was scandalous, because what should have happened is the Algerians should have put forward the resolution, should have let the U.S. veto it again so that everybody can see how murderous they are and how violently they are against international law. And then what should have happened, and what can still happen, is that all of these countries can then go to the General Assembly and pass Uniting for Peace resolution with 2/3 majority, which could have actual teeth. They can do things like call for economic sanctions against Israel, which would help the BDS movement. They could even call for a peacekeeping force. They could call for Israel to be suspended from the General Assembly. They could certainly call for an arms embargo. All these things, they could try to create an international tribunal if the ICC refuses to do its job. So there's a series of things. All of these countries, Brazil to Malaysia to Turkey, who talk a game and call Israel's genocide, but they are not putting their shoulder to the wheel in terms of the legal mechanisms that can and should be enforced. And I think people should be calling for that.
If I may just add to what Sam said, Bassam. Okay. Hello, Bassam.
Saeed, please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. And
listen, I just wanted to add because Sam is making very important points. The United States has always taken measures basically to perpetuate the war. The negotiations were a form to continue the war, to keep the war going until the goals as set out by the U.S. and Israel are achieved. I mean, we know they've done all this. Look, the 31st of May. It's not only because of the effort at the UN, but it's also because they have to cater to the electorate, to the electorate. They felt. I mean, that I've heard that, from people in the DNC and so on, that they are telling the electorate, the base, that we're doing something, and there's enough time to galvanize the base, and it's time to mobilize it and say, because they were stunned, by the uncommitted. The primaries had just been concluded and so on, and the uncommitted, there was a huge amount of votes. I mean, something like 800,000 voters voted uncommitted. It was unheard of. So it was stunning for them. They wanted to say, look, we are really doing something. We are going to put an end to this war and so on. So it's a number of things, So it is all these things to disallow, to obfuscate the effort at the UN to basically, fool the people again and say that we are doing something and so on, and then allow Israel to do whatever it wants. I mean, we saw that, May 31st, and then what happened on June 8th? On June 8th, we saw that the Israelis went in and killed 300 people to basically rescue 4 hostages and so on. And the U.S., why? Nobody ever questioned why the pier. All this time, the pier was used on that day. The pier was used, and then after that, lo and behold, it was declared that ineffective and will not be used again, and so on. So this is all, nonsense. So all these things, every time there was an effort, whether it's at the UN or by the ICJ or by the ICC and so on, we found that the U.S. tried to say, well, we're doing it. We are going to have a ceasefire. I think, and I may be wrong, and I don't want to sound cynical, but I think if you can hear me, Bassam, I think you do. I think the plan all along, the Biden plan, was actually to end the war or to bring about a ceasefire right when it did, right before his term ends. I mean, it is criminal in every way, because they had the power to do it. I mean, we all remember that in 2021, in May 2021, Bassam and Sam, I'm sure, knows that, Biden called Netanyahu in May 2021, and he told him, cut this out. You ran out of runway. Those are the terms that he told him, and he imposed a ceasefire. They could have done that. They could have done that at any time. The terms and so on were exactly the same thing, but they keep saying, we're gonna give them one more chance. We are going to destroy, and they did. They achieved a lot of goals. They, basically destroyed Hezbollah. They assassinated all the leaders. I mean, that amount in that time, they've done a great deal to accomplish their goals.
Just a footnote to that. In May of 2021, when there was another attack on Gaza that you reference, I think that part of the dynamics there was that some people were able to get to, and this is not an endorsement in any way, but AOC and Sanders put forward resolutions to cut off arms shipments to Israel fairly quickly, within a matter of days or weeks of that attack. And I've been very critical of them especially over the last year.
But that would have gone nowhere, Sam. We know that, submitting resolution and calling it would have gone nowhere.
Yeah,
so,
but in October,
I'm saying that the U.S. had the power to say, ceasefire now, and they knew it. They could have done this. They could have done this in early October.
Yeah, but I want to say it's not out of the goodness of Biden's heart. That there was actually some resistance from Congress in 2021, which did not exist in 2023, and I think that's part of the calculus here.
Yep.
Before too long, because we want to try to stay as close to 1 hour as possible, can you both share with us your thoughts on the ceasefire? Before we even, sorry, I actually should ask, and I want to ask us to take a moment and to appreciate the joy of Palestinians who were no longer, at least for now, subjected not just to daily killings, mutilation, and destruction, but also to the unfathomable fear that people can't understand unless they have lived under bombs constantly, as many of us have, and as Palestinians in Gaza specifically have for the past 15 months. Can you just say a couple of words about the sense of joy, Saeed?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it was what happened, the ceasefire and so on, was summed up by Anas Sharif, the journalist, the correspondent for Al Jazeera, and he lost all his family and so on. and he very simple. He tweeted a simple statement. Uh, a country like Israel loses by not winning, loses the war by not winning. And people like the Gaza people and the resistance win by not surrendering, by not losing. And that sums it up in terms of what happened. People are struggling to see who won and who lost in terms of military. And I think the fact that the Hamas endured, and continued to fight on, and basically showed the discipline in which they showed on Friday, I guess Saturday, when they turned the three hostages, is on Sunday. I mean, it's really amazing, amazing. They showed that they are able to fight, they're able to recruit, they're able to engender the respect that they did. People did not come out and say, damn you, you did this to us, and so on. Quite the contrary, they showed a great deal of support to them. And to their credit, they have been able to work with the communities and with the people in Gaza, despite all the tragedy. So yes, there's a reason to be joyous, because ending the bombs and not actually not worrying about your child will die tonight and so on. It's definitely a tremendous joy. They can sleep some nights. I've heard some statement that I want to sleep. I want to bury my kin that have been their bodies strewn about and so on in Gaza. I've talked to people there, and I talked to our correspondent in Gaza, and he just wanted to have a peaceful meal with what remains of his family. It's an amazing thing. See, I just want to be able to to break bread, as they say, and eat with them. So there is real joy. We cannot in any way sort of dismiss that, or undermine that, or say look at all the destruction and so on. They have no reason to be joyous. Yes, there is a reason to be joyous. And I tell you what, there's also a tremendous statement. Even Blinken himself acknowledged it on Wednesday when he spoke at the Atlantic Council. He said Hamas has been able to recruit more than they have lost, or as many as they have lost. And that is really a great statement, because it shows that the Palestinians will continue to fight. Nothing will bring them down. So you have to look at the ceasefire through this whole panorama, Bassam.
I respect Saeed's comments. I have a slightly different and perhaps more troubling perspective. When normal people hear this conflict created more Hamas fighters, they will conclude, therefore, you shouldn't have these wars. What I think the imperial mentality of a Blinken or of a Marco Rubio is, we got to kill more Palestinians.
Right. Yeah.
That's their conclusion. There's a genocidal undercurrent in Blinken's imperial mind with such a statement, that there are now more Hamas fighters, that therefore we have to kill more of them. So, and I would distinguish strongly between Israel's stated goals and their actual goals. Their stated goals are to protect Israeli Jews and to defeat Hamas and so on. I don't think that's Netanyahu's actual goal. Their actual goals are to pulverize and damage Palestinian society as much as possible, to continue Israel as a settler colonial state. So, and by Israel, France, and Britain was overcome, because they had a veto at the UN. France and Britain did, and the US and the Soviet Union used Uniting for Peace to bring in the first ever peacekeeping force into the Sinai and Gaza, ultimately, to force withdrawal in 1956, 1957. So I fear that we tend to progress, predict what will happen so much that we lose sight of what can I do.
Yes,
but just a comment to the comment and so on, sub comment. Look, sure. I mean, the ultimate goal of Israel is to pulverize, as Sam said, to pulverize the Palestinians, to disallow them from ever being, a viable community and so on, to keep them destroyed and poor and malnourished, or whatever it is. I mean, they drive them home, maybe, try to make Gaza uninhabitable, do the same thing in the West Bank and so on. But at least on the stated goals, we can say that they have not been able to achieve them. I mean, they said that they wanted to decapitate Hamas. They could not decapitate. They
I
killed
agree.
the leadership. Yeah, and let's remember, you know, uh, Yahya Sinwar was killed in a happenstance. I mean, they did not go after him. He's actually the one that went after them. It was a fight. It was a real fight between real fighters and Israeli occupation soldiers, and that's how he died. So they did achieve that, and they were able to assassinate Haniya for sure. They assassinate Saleh Aruri in Beirut for sure. But all in all, they have not been able to get their captives back, their detainees back by force. They were not able to do it. They were not able to destroy Hamas. They were not able to do any of that. They were not able to dislodge Hamas from Gaza. All these things have really failed, and they have failed miserably. Yes, I mean, I'm sure that every Zionist has in the back of his mind, the idea that one day there will be no Palestinians around. But in the end, their stated goals have failed miserably, and I think that gives the resistance not only good reason to have done what they did, but also to continue to fight, because the Palestinians, as long as this is their situation, they will continue to fight.
Saeed, before we give, I have a question about Syria for both of you actually,
Right.
And coverage or lack thereof, or the nature of
No,
it.
no, no.
But before we get there, can you tell us what you both think about the prospects for the ceasefire, given what might have taken place in order to achieve this ceasefire? In other words, something changed, and I hear you, Saeed, when you address what Trump said. Trump actually said something very powerful many months ago when he said that the Biden administration should have wrapped this up already. Like, he was very straight.
Yeah.
And by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, he never came back to say it as emphatically ever again after that interview. It could be because
Right.
he was asked by his advisors not to, or I don't know what it was. But that
Right.
definitely responded to what he may have thought himself. So what is it that might have taken place behind the scenes? What might have been some of the sort of give and take or trade-offs that have caused this to happen in this manner? What
Yeah.
are the relationships between what happened and, on the one hand, Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries and the United States? Can you just shed light on the nature of the ceasefire and the prospects given this new administration?
Well, I tell you what. Let's first talk about what is out there. What is being talked about. That Steve Witkoff went. He's Trump's envoy. He's a guy that has never been in diplomacy or politics ever in his life. He's a real estate guy and so on. He's a very strong Zionist. I mean, those are his credentials and so on. And it is alleged that he called Netanyahu and told him, "Listen, I'm going to come and see you." And Netanyahu said, "Today is the Shabbat," and so on. He said, "No, I'm going to come and see you. I'm like you," and so on, and all these things. And whatever, he used the strong words and so on, and went in and told them, "You better accept this, or else, because Trump wants this to end before he assumes office." Now, they may have been the case, but remember, until 11:59 a.m. today, Biden was president. They're the ones that really could call the shots. I mean, whatever leeway Witkoff had is basically what they allowed him. It was basically the Zionist trio that led this process. It's Hochstein and Britt McGurk, and Blinken and so on, and all these things. They're the ones that led this negotiations process in Qatar and so on. And this happened time and again because they would come up and say, peace at hand. We are there. I remember, Sam. We had a phone conference, a telephone conference with Britt McGurk back, right after they said, after the speech that made by Biden and on May 31, and he told everybody, including myself, yes, we have it at hand. We are, we are there. There's nothing that could scuttle this unless there's, something unforeseen and so on. Well, in fact, they knew all along it's going to be scuttled. So, the ceasefire occurred, I think, for a number of reasons. First of all, like I said, this genocide, the shelf life of this genocide, it ended from Israel's perspective. You can bomb and continue to bomb and so on without achieving your goals. It was, we have seen also in the last 3 weeks a spike and Israeli casualties and so on. There are a number of reasons as to why it now. But I can assure you, Sam, Bassam, there is no effort. There is no pressure, let's say, from Saudi Arabia or the Arab countries. I mean, there was an expression of displeasure by Egypt. Qatar facilitated because it's just they are very close to the Americans. They have a very strong.
Saeed, I'm referring to the opposite of pressure. I'm referring to whether we might see something, some movement on the normalization front.
Oh, yes, we will. I think we will because that's, Trump and, in fact, the Biden administration, they moved. Biden came into office saying, Palestinian state, I want to reopen the consulate in Jerusalem. I mean, those words, I am going to renew aid to UNRWA. They did, but now they withheld it in last January. And they said, we are going to reopen the PLO office in Washington. None of this happened. So they moved completely. I mean, I remember I was asking day in and day out about, let's say, reopening of the consulate, something, softball, something like this that has existed since 1832. The consulate has been in Jerusalem since 1832. So, and they would always say, yeah, we are sure, we are going to reopen it and so on. So it was all nonsense. It was BS. So now, then they moved to say that normalization. They kept saying normalization, and you had their cronies, Thomas Friedman, others in the Post and so on. They were consistently repeating about the value of normalization. That if you have normalization, then all things will be hunky dory. So now we know that Mr. Normalization, the Abraham Accord, and I once asked Ned Price, why do you want to call it the Abraham Accords? It's a phony name. Is it someone who named, we Camp David because it was held in Camp David, or others are named because of a place or location? Did someone named Abraham that really oversaw this process? It's nonsense. It's BS. So this is Trump's baby. He's going to push for it. He's going to give Saudi Arabia the security deal they want in exchange for normalization.
Sam, any words on the ceasefire? And because every time I broach any topic with you, you always have this interesting angle. I'm not going to say it's always contrarian, but sometimes it is, and I'd love to hear from you.
Well, Miriam Adelson was there at the inauguration today. That should mean something. She was standing behind, smirking and whatever, George Bush. Netanyahu's openly saying that they can start up fight, attacking Gaza again at their pleasure. But they might have other targets in mind, whether that's the West Bank or Yemen or whatever. I mean, we have seen Israel accomplish a great many things. They hurt Hezbollah. They killed Nasrallah. Syria is, in the state that it's in, that is high degree of
ceased to exist. Syria ceased to exist.
Yeah, Israel is now in Syria beyond the Golan Heights. So these are remarkable achievements from Netanyahu's perspective. We have to be honest.
I have to take this call. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You're gonna miss.
And
You're gonna miss the question about Syria, but
No,
we will
no,
have
no,
you on again,
I'll stick
Saeed.
around. I don't know why they call me now. You know. Yeah, go ahead.
I can talk for a minute, and then you can jump back in if you want.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, and they might have other targets beyond the region, right? I mean, Rubio is coming in.
Because it will keep.
Rubio is very pro-Israel, but he might be someone who might push for, say, targeting Cuba or targeting Venezuela to put them higher on the target list of the U.S. establishment. So those could also be factors as to what happens here and whether the United
Hello.
States actually wants Israel
Yes.
to start this up again or not. Um,
قلت لي على 4:15 على وقت.
there are a
هلا
number of
بعطيني 5 دقائق. Okay.
factors as to whether or not this thing holds or not. I think, but again, we'll go back to it. Let's not sit around predicting. And I mean, the way I alluded to this earlier, the way the transitions happen is very interesting. I mean, 1980 is another example. I mentioned before 2008, 2009, when a previous attack on Gaza ended right before Obama took office. You also have the example of 1980, which is very similar in that was when the captives, hostages were released from Iran right before right before Reagan took office, as Carter was stepping aside. So I think that the U.S. system, in part, uses elections as a way to turn the page to things. And 2016 was also an interesting transition because you saw the Obama administration allow a UN resolution for the first time in a very long time in December of 2016. On their way out the door, they allowed a resolution to go through condemning Israeli settlements, which Trump attempted to sabotage by going to the Russians to get them to delay that vote until Trump got in and was planning on vetoing it. And that's actually the origins of Russiagate. Russiagate, what liberals refer to as Russiagate, initiated in large part as an attempt to ask Russia to do a favor for Israel. They wanted Russia to delay the vote at the UN Security Council in 2016, condemning Israel until after Trump could get in there in January so that they could veto it. So these transition periods frequently highlight the insidious nature of how the U.S. and Israeli establishments function together.
I mean, there are a lot of questions. People are asking questions about Lebanon and the embassy, U.S. embassy there. I want to ask about Syria, but before we get to that, very quickly, if we can be like a bit concise, so we can get to some of these questions. First, as journalists who are and have been in the midst of things for many, 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 many years, do you think the approach of the new Trump administration is going to be different, at least in the press briefings, if not the broader policy? Are we going to see? I mean, one of the annoying things about the previous administration is that it wanted to put on a face of legality, of adherence to international law, to various values, and so on. We all would rather this not be the case and have people say exactly what they're doing than to sort of take people on a ride and so on. How might the new administration be, whether in terms of its media relations or in general when it comes to the question of Palestine? Let's start with Saeed, and then we'll go to Sam, and then we'll jump to another topic.
Well, I tell you what, the last Trump administration, we sort of struggled until we had briefings and so on. Then we had 2 briefings a week for a while. I mean, they changed 3 spokespeople and so on. It took a while, and then we had COVID, and so it was difficulty after difficulty all along in the briefing room. Pompeo would come actually more often than Blinken did, but he would come. He would always defend Israel and so on. Now we understand that there is a a new spokeswoman. Her name is Tammy Bruce. She used to be a very strong, lifty feminist, militant feminist, and so on. In the old days, she was the head of the Los Angeles Now chapter. Now the Now organization, the head of the National Organization of Women. She was the head of the Los Angeles chapter now, and then she flipped. She became right winger. She's an Islamophobe. She has a radio talk show in which she's constantly, saying horrible, awful stuff about Muslims and Palestinians and so on. So we shall see whether this is going to happen or not. I mean, she is a talker. She talks a great deal. She's not mic shy, so she's not a microphone shy. So we shall see whether there's going to be briefings with the same frequency or not. I mean, the one thing for sure that Trump started the tradition of running foreign policy from the White House, and that tradition continued under Biden. The same thing. So basically, it was John Kirby and Jean Pierre was not Karen Jean Pierre was not really all that effective as spokesperson. They basically clipped her wings because she had spoken in the past about the rights of Palestinians and so on. So we shall see. I believe that it will now. Rubio is a neocon, and Rubio is a right winger. A hawk on defense policies and Israel. They were all competing. Him and Hegseth were competing in the hearing about who is really more pro-Israel. But not only that, who hates the Palestinians more. So we shall see.
Sam, and I'm glad to hear that Rubio has ideas. I wasn't aware of that in general. Sam?
I mean, I genuinely don't know how things are going to pan out. I presume that with the current structure that it will be very much in favor of an imperial Israel and all that implies. It would be delightful, I guess, if Trump were actually direct and straightforward, and the Trump administration were direct and straightforward. They tend to be more sort of contradictory rather than slick. But I don't know if I can offer too many insights beyond that.
Okay, very quickly, two quick
I
rapid
have
fire.
2 minutes. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, very quickly. You go first, Saeed. One, if you can tell us a little bit about what you have experienced in terms of the U.S. position on Syria, what has happened in Syria, the way it has happened, the connections between what Turkey has done in terms of giving Hayat Tahrir al-Sham the green light to get out of Idlib and begin its surprising march, because it was also a surprise for them, and what is U.S. position on this question, because they have actually wavered, have been back and forth, even though we could guess what the situation is, and now we kind of know a lot more. If you can tell us, what has the administration been saying about this? And second, what do you think about the question of Lebanon now that Hezbollah has been basically weakened, and the U.S. is pushing for, as we have seen, for another formula in Lebanon? If you can just share your thoughts in a couple minutes, and then we'll go to Sam.
Okay. Well, in Syria, what happened in Syria is, the vintage American plan. That's exactly what they did. They worked it out with Turkey, worked it out with Israel. They're the ones that allowed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to do what they did. They're the ones that we don't know what was happening behind the scenes, but for sure, it served America's policy and interest 100%. And look what happened. I mean, Israel occupied the rest of the Golan Heights. It occupied areas in Sweden and so on. And the Americans said nothing. They said that Israel is doing this temporarily because lest these weapons and these positions fall into hostile hands for Israel. So we know that this is an American plan. They do want to divide Syria. So Syria is heading toward division. Syria, as the country that it did, does not exist anymore. it is divided into different enclaves. The Americans will stay where they are in Deir Zur and in the east, the northeast, and so on. And they will continue to steal the oil because Trump said that. Remember, he said that we are there for the oil. So that fits very well with his policies, unfortunately. I think in Lebanon also, America has achieved its goals in Lebanon. And they keep this, Hochstein. I think Hochstein might stay on, by the way, with the coming administration, because he's done very well in terms of, enforcing whatever grandiose kind of plans or schemes the U.S. has had. They ran for a while. They ran Lebanon from the American embassy, and I think now they feel there is a prime minister and a president who is going to be very friendly to the U.S. and will continue to take whatever they want into account, and we shall see. But for sure, Lebanon of the past, where the Muqawama, the resistance, was able to have a tremendous say so, is that Lebanon of the past.
Thank you, Saeed. We can let you safely and
Thank you.
go,
Thank
and
you.
you'll join us hopefully soon. I'm sure there's going to be a
Inshallah.
lot more
Allah.
to talk
Thank
about.
you for
Salam.
having me.
Habibi,
Thank you,
salam.
Sam. Good to see you, Sam.
Good to see you.
Sam, what's your take on this question of Syria, if you'd like to comment on it? And then, of course, the Lebanon question. Basically, the things that have gone Israel's way and the US's way, what are we likely to see on the one hand, but also how has it been discussed in the press, and what kind of behind the scenes things you conjecture has happened?
I don't have too much to add. I think that it's been a long time desire of the United States to weaken and perhaps carve up Syria. So I think we may well be seeing something like that happening. And an additional benefit from how Lebanon has played out, or how Lebanon has been played with, perhaps, is that you had Salem leave the presidency of the ICJ. In his becoming prime minister of Lebanon. That was quite a bank shot that they managed to pull off. And now the at least interim president of the ICJ is the Ugandan representative, who was probably, other than the Israeli ad hoc representative judge, she was probably the most pro-Israeli person on the ICJ, and now she's interim president. So I should hope that the ICJ will elect a new president, and I should hope that the General Assembly will put another judge that is somebody who's actually interested in international law and implementing it. So that is yet another reason, the way that this played out in Lebanon, that I don't see this ceasefire as necessarily, again, obviously a tremendous relief to the people who have been suffering and under bombs and getting slaughtered day to day. But I suspect that we are still in a state where they are able to put further stages of an overall diabolical plan. And we should be extremely skeptical of pronouncements from all sides, and we should act on what we can act upon.
All right. Before I let you go, Sam, if we can ask you a question about domestic politics. I know that you are extremely engaged with domestic politics. People who follow your Substack know, and those who do not should follow. How can we tell people to follow your Substack? Can you give me URL?
Please, they can go to Husseini.org, and that lists where I am on different platforms.
Are you serious? Husseini.org? You've got Husseini.org?
At Husseini.org. I got it years ago.
At Husseini. Okay. I thought it's a website. Okay. At Husseini.org.
No. The website, Husseini.org.
Oh, man. Why? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It goes to a LinkedIn tree, and at the top of it, if you click the top one, that takes you to my Substack. and that's my latest writings. And I mean, the so-called domestic issue that I've followed fairly closely. Let me say two things. One is on his way out here, and this might ruffle some feathers on some of your listeners. Um, uh, Biden pardoned a number of people, including Fauci. I was one of the few people associated on the left who took very seriously the possibility that COVID had lab origins. And I view this as another part of the establishment's way of militarizing health. They create pathogens that are more lethal and call it biodefense. This really got started with the anthrax attacks. You might remember, Bassam, and your listeners might remember, in 2001, shortly after the 9/11 attacks, you had the anthrax attacks, in which anthrax was sent to members of the media and members of Congress and senators. And it was framed as an Arab thing. It was like, death to Israel, death to America, you die now. It ended up coming out of a US lab. So it was a false flag bioweapons attack on the US Congress, caused Congress to shut down. Congress has never investigated it. And they took that opportunity. It was largely orchestrated by Cheney and by Fauci to juice up so-called biodefense, which is actually biowarfare. There's a new documentary that I'm in called Thank You, Dr. Fauci, that features Jeffrey Sachs, Richard E. Bright from Rutgers, and other people who've tried to follow this issue. So that is a very dangerous thing. The U.S. is adding to its arsenal additional measures, including biowarfare. The threats to humanity from the U.S. military machine are many-fold, and they come from both sides of the so-called political spectrum. That leads me to another project that I have, which is to get disenchanted Republicans, which there should be many of, and disenchanted Democrats, which there should be many of, to pair up and both vote for non-genocidal independent candidates instead of being playthings of one or two of the establishment parties. By coming together, and you generally got to do it with somebody that you know and trust and are in the same state as. This would be a way of asserting the independence of the people from the duopoly structure that seeks to restrict them, seeks to have perpetual war, seeks to restrict civil liberties and free speech, and so on.
Yes, if you can tell us a little bit now about where you think we are headed in terms of domestic politics, like strictly domestic politics. And I know that this is a little bit outside the purview of what we are discussing, but because the inauguration was today, and because of your longstanding, observation of what's been happening, if you'd like to share this with us. And I just want to confirm before too long that Husseini.org is at www.husseini.org, correct?
Correct. Is that not working for you?
It's right there. It's on the screen, so people can go to Husseini.org and then take a look at your work and writings and production everywhere, I guess, including your Substack. But if you can tell us what does it mean regarding domestic politics? We do know that, which was very enlightening, that Trump declared that there are only two genders today. So thankfully now we know there are only two genders, male and female. But besides that, what else can we expect domestically?
It's funny. Every time that subject comes up, I think of the time that I visited Damascus in 2007, and I went to the art museum there, which was beautiful. And there was this tiny little statuette of what looked like a female figure, but with male genitalia. And it was a beautiful little statuette of what used to be called a hermaphrodite. And every time this, gender issues come up as if it's something new and crazy and radical, I'm like, I got a statuette here that's thousands of years old. Get a grip on these issues. Um, I think, I mean, front and center seems to be immigration. Trump claimed today that we have spent not enough money guarding our own borders and too much money guarding other people's borders. And that's totally wrong. The United States has spent billions upon billions in violating other countries' borders. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, obviously the Palestinians, Lebanon, and so on. So I think that with immigration is going to be central to the Trump agenda. And I think that it needs to be thought of in terms of root causes. Going back to my vote pact thing, the left and the right disagree on immigration, but they actually agree on the sources of the problem. You know, desperate immigration is caused by interventions and wars, and you know, a lot of people on the left and right agree that that should stop. They're caused by corrupt corporate trade deals that impoverish third world people, and they're caused by the drug policies that foster the illegal drug trade. And a lot of people on both the left and right actually agree on those three issues. And if that could be acted upon, then the sources of the problem of immigration would go away, and the establishment would be deprived of using it as a way of separating people so that they're squabbling over an issue like that, while the military-industrial complex, while the pro-Israeli forces, while big tech and Wall Street basically run the show.
Okay, well, you know, we have a lot of time to go back and address this and other topics. Do you feel, before I let you go, do you feel that there'll be a different treatment of your presence at press briefings under the Trump administration?
I don't know. I was, you know, occasionally called on during the last Trump administration, and I was. The two things that they did right the other day was they gave me back all my stuff, and they did give me back my hard pass, my card to get into the State Department. I haven't been back there yet to know if it works or not. And I will certainly make it public as to whether if it doesn't work. So I should hope that I get in, and I should hope that I be treated with a measure of respect and um, uh, get serious answers to some of my very serious questions.
طيب شكرا. Thank you, Sam, very much for joining us. I'm very sorry what you had about what you had to go through, and very glad that you were able to join us and that you are in decent health. It looks like in the coming years, many of us who are interfacing with the public in the United States have to actually hit the gym a little harder in order to, you know, protect ourselves physically. And unfortunately, as great the news is about a ceasefire, all of us have some sort of apprehension as to what might take place and what might come next from this administration regarding this topic. I do know that a lot of people are thinking, "Oh my God, Trump is a savior," and I follow your cue in being careful, very careful, if not the opposite, actually, regarding what we might expect. Shukran, Sam, and I will now close with just the video with Anthony Blinken speaking and you interrupting. Anyway, salam. Take care, Habibi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bassam. It's a
Thank
delight.
you. Thank you for joining always.
And I want to thank my colleagues, in particular, Jake Sullivan, Bill Burns, Brett McGurk, for their remarkable skill, tireless dedication over these many months of negotiation.
Will you recognize the Geneva Conventions apply to the Palestinians?
And again, I'm happy to address questions when we have a chance. I'm happy to address questions in a moment. Thank you. As we celebrate the return of hostages in Gaza, including Americans, as we look to relief for the people of Gaza, I'm also thinking of all those U.S. citizens who are held wrongfully, who are hostage in countries around the world.
Do you know about the
I
Hannibal
carry with me-
Directive? Miller says he doesn't know about the Hannibal Directive. Do you know about the Hannibal Directive?
Again, I'm happy to address
Well, then we're
questions.
gonna
No, I want him
respect
to
him.
answer my
Just a few more
question.
minutes.
Respect his
I look
speaking.
forward to answering
He's going to
questions.
speak
in
for
minutes.
an
Thank you.
hour.
Okay, well, we'll let him speak. We're here for him. Thank you.
Thank
He
you.
gets to make lots of speeches.
Sir,
Thank
you
you.
Let him
can
answer
leave
some
if you'd like. Would you like to be
questions.
escorted
I
out?
Let him
forward to
answer
answering
some
questions. Thank
questions
you.
instead of making another speech every
Sir,
day.
would you like to be escorted out?
Go away.
You don't have the responsibility to tell me where to go. Do you want to be escorted out or not?
I want him to
Thank you.
answer
Okay,
questions.
then let's be quiet.
I'm
I
a
look forward to
journalist.
answering questions in a minute.
I'm a
Thank
journalist.
you.
I'm not a potted plant.
Everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions in just a minute. Thank you.
Miller
So-
has explicitly told me he will not answer my questions. I'm justified in
So-
what I'm doing.
I have no greater pleasure in this job than crossing off a list I carry in my pocket, the names of those who have been arbitrarily detained and unfairly held hostage, unjustly held hostage, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally, I
Get
just
your
wanted
hands
to share
off
this
me.
morning.
Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Answer a damn question.
I look
Do you know
forward to
about the
answering
Hannibal
questions in a few
Directive?
minutes.
Do you know about Israel's nuclear weapons? Everybody from the ICJ. I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions, and so I'm asking
Please,
questions.
sir, respect the
Wasn't-
process. We'll have an
wasn't-
opportunity to take
Wasn't
questions
the
in a few
IC,
minutes.
wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders. You
Please, sir, respect the process. Thank you.
Oh, respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International, to the ICJ, saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process.